It's me, and it's just me today. Just me. Hey, the chat thing's working properly. So, my esteemed partner in crime is bedbound at the moment due to an operation on her foot. So, you've just got me. Just me. How awesome is that? I'm getting an echo. Let me get rid of there's nothing worse than hearing yourself. That's better. Yes, that is better. I'm hoping everyone can see and hear me fine. We've got a good amount of stuff to go through today. I've managed to come up with quite a good agenda to keep everyone occupied. With absolutely no one to banter with, this is going to be rather different. So, let's get straight into some rather awesome animal news. So, I've been waiting for a new species of rat to be announced while I was doing UnPouched, and finally it's happened! Finally! So, a new species of rat has been discovered. How awesome is this? It's called the Tweezer-Beaked rat. When I'm looking off the side, it's because I'm reading my notes, not because the camera's there and the notes are there. It doesn't quite look... Anyway, new species of rat, the Tweezer-Beaked rat. It's been found on Newfoundland, and only recently properly documented. I think they'd seen some signs of this rat, apparently, but never been able to capture it. And there's quite a funny story, apparently. So they were capturing some rats around Newfoundland, and they were using peanut butter as a means of catching them in the traps. And they noticed that there was some rats that just weren't interested in this peanut butter, and they were trying different things to see. And one of the researchers tried leaving a live earthworm in the trap, and lo and behold, bang, they finally got a good look at this new rat. I've got a wonderful rendition of one, or rather a picture. Let's just move on to... There we go. So there's apparently no actual pictures of them yet, seeing as none of the researchers have really had one long enough to snap a picture of, or at least one that we can see. But yes, this is a new species, never before seen, called the Tweezer-Beaked rat. Apparently they've called them a kangaroo rat because they hop around on their back feet, which is quite unusual. And even more strange is they apparently have virtually no chewing teeth. So whereas obviously most rodents would have very, very large teeth at the front for chewing, these guys don't. They mainly predate on earthworms, and they just slurp them up. So that's a very similar way to how a mole would feed, I believe. So yeah, really, really unusual and rather cool, I think. That was the only real decent bit of news. There's not really much happening, but I thought we'd move on to something a bit more current. Still kind of classed as news, but I'm looking for a bit of feedback on what people think of this. So let's flip back to me. So there's been some stuff that was happening, and I noticed this on the one of the other rat groups. I won't name the rat group specifically, nor name any people involved in this, but I'm just seeing regarding size, it doesn't actually say anywhere how big they are. There's no indication of how big they are, but I trying to guess from the illustrations, and this is the tweezer-nosed rat, beaked rat, that they're probably around the size of a standard fancy rat, judging by the illustrations. Really, really hard to tell. Anyway, so this was a case where, and it was kind of an offshoot of celebrating Gay Pride. Someone had dyed one of their fancy rats in various colours. And it started a bit of this hoo-ha between people going, "Oh, this is wrong, this is wrong," and other people saying, "This is fine, it's non-toxic dyes." I'm personally not comfortable with that. I mean, I'm totally comfortable with people celebrating Gay Pride. I think that's awesome, but involving animals in that, I'm personally not so sure. But it created a huge stir on the group with people going, "I'm for it, I'm against it." And I was trying to find a picture that didn't include a person or didn't include a face of anyone. What I want to do is just make sure this doesn't involve the people. It's purely the subject matter that we're involved in discussing. But I'll flip onto the picture and see what people think. I mean, I'm really not sure what I make of this. I mean, I thoroughly believe that the animal doesn't care either way. if it's food dyes, they'll probably quite enjoy licking it back out of their far afterwards, or at least if they're non-toxic natural food dyes. But I mean, I personally wouldn't want to do it to any of my animals. I don't think the animal would really understand the meaning behind it. But yeah, I mean, it really did create quite a stir. Just curious what everyone's thoughts are on this, and what people think. Rather strange. Not a lot more to add to that, I don't think. But we can revisit if people put some comments up around what they think of it. I'll be curious to discuss with them. I mean, we've used times that we've used dyes before. Yeah, if you've got identical rats, we've used marks on their tail or food dye on their tails to mark them apart. So, you know, there's kind of a purpose to it there. My concern would be, would it cause any skin irritation? I mean, natural dyes probably not, but you'd never really know, and I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if something had happened. I've always been quite funny about things like soaps and stuff that you use for them, but yeah, we'll chuck some comments up. I'll be really curious to revisit this, see what people think. One of the big things is the rat gay. Do you know, funny that we watched this awesome program last night, and it was talking about this is a bit, I hadn't prepared this part actually, but I should have done. It's really relevant. It was called My Gay Dog and Other Animals. I don't know if anyone else caught it. It was really quite interesting. It was saying that there's a real interesting research that's been done to show that it does exist in animals. They had a ram that was absolutely no interest in females at all. Would go right through a herd of females to get to where the males were, and enjoy it wasn't even about anything sexual, just enjoyed being around the males rather than the females. There was a dog that was quite nervous around females, but would sit there and hump another male dog, absolutely silly. There was a lion as well, and this made the news a while back. I do remember it, but say the people from the country, I can't remember the name of the country it was from now. They were saying, "Oh, it's possessed. It's a demon, and it's just silly." But this lion apparently really enjoyed engaging in sexual acts with another male lion, and I think it shows that it's perfectly natural and it exists in nature as well. But I guess that's we're probably straying into territory not worth discussing here. Let's move on to one of the big things I wanted to discuss today. We had some really awesome questions put up from one member and then another member that asked if we could also go through them, and I'm hoping they're watching, and I'm hoping we can answer their questions, because in all the time I've been doing this and all the time that I've been involved with pouch rats, this has to be the first time I've seen some real decent questions put up that are really, really interesting. So I'm going to go through these questions one by one and answer them. And if anyone has anything extra they want to add, chip in. I'd be really interested. So question one was, are there any common health problems? And if so, what are they? So the only common health problem that we've come across is torpor appearing. And this happened around 2 years ago. As a community, we lost quite a number of rats, I would say around 5 or 6, over one winter. And it was a particularly cold winter. And we couldn't put it down to any one particular issue. But I would guess, at the time we were assuming that it was torpor. These animals were slowing down, becoming very sluggish, and just fading away. We never really got to the bottom of it. That's the only time we've ever seen something cause deaths to that degree. There's no real another issue that we've seen in them. They don't suffer from the similar issues that fancy rats do. So let's say, for example, mycoplasma infections. They don't seem to suffer with them. When we're not seeing tumours or anything like that, at least not that we've actively seen. I think I personally know of one case of a tumour and another case of a internal malignant cancer. So it's really hard. They will obviously appear In others, as Bob's putting, yeah, with Charlie, it was awful, and it was. I mean, that appeared to be cancer, not so much being due to the cold weather, but you never know what part that plays. But so yeah, that was one of the only common health issues we've seen with them. Is pouchy veterinary care similar to that of fancy rats? If you were to speak to a vet, they would say yes. Most mammals of that size are going to have very, very similar very, very similar in the way that they work and in the way that they're treated. What we don't know so much is their reaction to certain medications. So this is where we tend to be, as a community anyway, a bit more cautious, is when trying new medications. We've personally, and this is us personally, have had problems with Baytril. I know of other owners that haven't, but we've had 2 cases of Baytril causing severe diarrhea and dehydration in pouches. So the only veterinary care that we try to be a bit more careful about is medications, and being just a bit more on the ball, a bit more having a bit more observation around the effects that they have in terms of new medication that's not been widely used. At what age do you recommend neutering males if you don't want them to breed? Now, I certainly do. I would really advocate neutering males, and that the age to get them done is around 6 months, anywhere between 6 months and a year, because, and we'll touch on this later on, but pouches go through a really awful period around 6 months, and in the males especially, the hormones start to come up. They're coming up to breeding age, and they can be really, really hormonal. So this is a good way of just nipping that in the bud before it really kicks in. So that would be my recommendation. When it comes to having any animal neutered, there's going to be risks. So you got to weigh up: is it worth the risk of having them neutered? Is it something you can put up with? Because it does die down. The hormone levels do die down. Just got to kind of take as it comes. Is it even possible to spay such small creatures as female pouchies? And then at what age should that be done? Now, we don't, as a community, I don't think we've ever had any females spayed. Not that I'm aware of. There might be some in the past. I can't see a reason to have a female spayed. If you're going to keep a pair together and you don't want them to breed, it would be much safer to have the male done. The only time I would foresee a need to have a female spayed, and I would say the same for fancy rats or any other animals for that matter, because having a spay is much more invasive, is if there's some sort of problem. So if you've got some problem with the womb or some abnormal bleeding or something where the vet recommends, I have to have them done. I think in fancy rats, the vets probably have a bit more experience doing that than they would do in pouches. In dogs and cats, I know it's for most vets it's a walk in the park, but I wouldn't really see a reason to have it done in female rats. It would be, for me, a worry more than I would really necessarily want to take of a risk. What vaccines, if any, are required? Lepto is very common here, and one of my dogs came down with it despite having been vaccinated. There's no vaccines that we give to, especially here in the UK, that we regularly give to smaller animals. The dogs and cats have vaccinations for various things, but for pouchies, no need for any vaccinations. Number 5, what would you advise potential owners to start out with, fancy rats or jump straight in? We as a community have said a couple of times now to different people that fancy rats, pouch rats, they're not really one of the same. It's not like you get a pass that says I've got a stamp that says I've kept fancy rats, thus I'm qualified. If you take everything good and bad about fancy rat and dial it up and add a load of new stuff in there and take a few things away, you've basically got a pouch rat. I would say if you've kept parrots, you're probably more experienced with what these could be like than with fancy rats. Fancy rats are a walk in the park in comparison to these guys. I end up forgetting myself, and sometimes I'll pick up one of our fancy rats and go, "Oh, you feel so cuddly and squishy, and you're so easy." And you know that these guys are all chunky and squidgy, and then you pick up the pouch rats, and you've got this big lump of muscle that's very, very strong-willed. So, going from one to the other, fine if you've had fancy rats. I don't think there's going to be a huge amount that you can take forward. If I was asking a potential owner, it wouldn't put me off or give me any extra reassurance if they had fancy rats in the past. It wouldn't really factor into it to me. If they'd had a parrot, that would probably be more of a plus than if they'd kept fancy rats. Question number 6. How do pouchies get on with other pets? Do they tend to be fearful or learn to get along with other species? What about smaller pets? Will they eat my cockatiel? So, if you imagine how pouchies are in the wild, they don't have a lot of natural predators. Now, a lot of prey animals, such as mice, rats, they're very, very scared. They're very, very on guard all the time because they're predated on by larger animals. Now, pouchies don't have natural predators. They have very, very occasional natural predators in the sense that they might get predated on by birds, by larger mammals, but in much a rarity. Not in the same way that you would say, for example, like a rabbit might have natural predators, or a wild rat. So for that reason, they're very, very bolshy. They don't have a lot of fear for anything. And if anyone knows African animals, they're very, very headstrong because there's such a competition for food, for water, for space out there, and territory. They're willing to fight for it. Now, I would compare, if you were to put on, say, a fancy rat is a badger, and a pouch rat is a honey badger. Now, if anyone knows honey badgers, that's a good comparison to how different they are. Everything is dialed up, and they are not scared of anything. Honey badgers will attack a snake, get bitten by a snake, fall asleep when they get poisoned, and wake up and then eat the snake. So, how they react to other animals? Well, my cat, she's grown up around rats, and I trained her from a very young age that rats are friends, not food. And I give her all her credit. She's done brilliantly with the fancy rats. But she's petrified of the pouch rats. She will run, and we tend to now make sure that she's out of the room. We have a back room. She goes out there when the pouches are out, because I feel sorry for her, because they will just chase around the house, and it's not fair on her. They have no fear. Now, with other smaller mammals, it's a risk. You never really know how they're going to be. I think I've had this debate around fancy rats before, fancy rats and pouch rats together. I personally wouldn't take the risk. I know that I have friends that do, so I can't say that's wrong, don't do it. I personally wouldn't, on the basis that I know that a pouch rat could, just like that, kill a fancy rat. And you would never forgive yourself if you woke up in the morning and there was just a bloodbath, and that's entirely possible. If I look at it this way, 2 fancy rats fight, and they're pretty evenly matched, and it would take a lot for one of them to kill the other one. It's not to say that it couldn't happen, but they're going to be quite evenly matched. A pouch rat would overpower a fancy rat 10-1. For that reason, the fancy rat would have absolutely no chance if the pouch rat turned on them, and I couldn't take that risk. Anything smaller than a fancy rat, I think the pouch rat would just see it as food. So I wouldn't introduce them to other animals, really. Bit of a worry, really. Right, next on the list we've got, are they escape artists, like on a scale of 1 to Houdini? I like that, 1 to Houdini. What's that? 1 to Houdini. How hard are they to keep safe from dangerous areas of the house or pets? They will get anywhere. Now, someone might remember a post I put up a while back saying, I never envisaged myself saying stop chewing the ceiling, and that's because they will get anywhere. So when you do pouchy proofing for fancy rats, you really pouchy proof for pouch rats, because there's nowhere they can't get to. You see a work surface that's up higher, yep, they'll get to there, they can jump high enough. You get to know, so I think especially if you have one from a baby, you're going to watch how they move around the house, you're going to observe them, you're going to know where they should and shouldn't go, and then you're going to put preventative means up to make sure that they're not getting there. Just assume that they're going to get there, they're going to destroy it, they're going to eat it. We have house plants, they're in every other room. I would love a really nice house plant in the living room, but the pouches roam in the living room, it's never going to happen. We have one plant, and every time the pouches come out we have to move it. because they would climb up and they'll start eating it. And you never really know what the reaction is going to be to eating a houseplant. Some houseplants we have in the house are highly toxic, so you never really know. How hard are they to litter train? By far the easiest animal I have ever litter trained, and that even beyond a cat. In the wild, they will tend to look for water, and they'll poo in water. So when you provide them with a bowl of water, they go in the bowl of water. I'm yet to see a pouchie that doesn't do that. They all seem to do it from day one. Haven't they learned from mum? Whether it's something that they learn from mum or just something they naturally do. But most of the time, yeah, they'll go in water, and it makes for litter tray cleaning really easy. Just tip that down the toilet, you're done. Oh, we'll have to fly through these. What is the best accommodation for when you can't supervise them? Rat cages, chinchilla cages, indoor rabbit cages, or parrot cages? Parrot cages are ideal. They've got really, really strong bars, and they tend to have a good mechanism on them. These guys will get a mechanism over if they want to. They'll get it open. So, I mean, I've known of friends had to padlock their cage because they would get out. They'd open the mechanism. So, a good strong all metal cage. The only plastic we've found that they don't chew is perspex. Any PVC based plastic, anything else will just get mullered in no time at all. So plastic bottom cages are out the question really when it comes to these guys. I would just purely stick with metal cages. Parrot cages are great for them. You want to give them a nice amount of room. I mean, they are very lazy animals. When they're in the cage, they're going to be asleep, but it's good to give them enough room. So if there is that time when they're awake and you're not there to let them out, then they've still got plenty of place to play, etc. And the final question, number 12. If there was one thing you wish you'd known before you got a pouchie, what would it be? There's not just one thing I wish I'd known. It would be everything. I didn't find a lot of. I mean, this is partly why we started the National Pouch Rat Society. Is that there was lots of people to provide help, but there was very little in terms of concrete help. I'm a sucker for information. It has to be kind of proven. I like to see some sort of proof of something before I can take it at face value. Be that observed behaviour as it's going on, or a video, or something a bit more scientific. And there wasn't really a lot of that. There was a lot of hearsay. So we're trying now to go through and make sure that what we've observed, or at least by saying it's opinion as opposed to fact. I could write you a list of 100 things that I wish I'd known before I got pouchies. The one thing I wish I'd known is how lovely they can be. They can be amazingly lovely. They can also be really horrible. So we'll take it at that. Talking about difficulties, that's our questions. I can see I'm going to go through some questions as I'm seeing them popping up. Yep, remember being a group member who raised them together with a fancy rat and pouch rat. That's correct. Is there any other rats that use the toilet besides Arthur? That's a good question. Arthur will use the toilet every day. He doesn't need to be told to. He won't even go in his cage anymore. Has to. So for us not to let him out of an evening would be cruel, because he'll just hold it in. Honestly, he will hold it in and won't go. Some of the others will occasionally go on the toilet. Some of the others will go in the bath. They'll go down the plug hole, and some just prefer to go in their cage. So it's swings and roundabouts. Some do, some don't. You can always tell when another one's done it, because you'll see two different colour poos in the toilet, and you'll know someone else has done one. So that's the questions. I've got another 2 things to quickly go through that might be of interest. So some of you might remember I posted a while back about Bob and Lois. This has been a real interesting thing for us. So when we started going into this whole breeding process, one of the hardest parts that I've ever known about with animals is getting your head around the breeding process. What you should and shouldn't do, how to make sure that you're being fair on your doe, how you're being fair on your buck. And with fancy rats, it's easy. You get boy, you get girl, you go, yeah, well, they kind of match up what we want. You put them in a cage together, they do their business, females in heat, Bob's your uncle, 21 days later, babies. Easy peasy. With pouchies, it's a whole different story. as some people will know, we were actively trying to establish a breeding program, or at least get one started, for 6 months before anything happened. And when it did happen, we had Selly, and Selly wasn't fed by mum, followed by Floki, another single baby, who this time was fed, and then she's now had the 3 babies, which is the first time she's had a decent sized litter. And she went straight from one to the other. She was very much in the condition that she would go straight. I mean, from Selly to Floki, you could tell actively she was very stressed. She wasn't happy that this one baby she couldn't feed. In her eyes, the baby died, I guess, in her eyes. She doesn't know that Selly's her daughter. And with Floki, I think it was Floki. He did well. He grew well, but we did a bit of supplementary feeding with him because he wasn't really thriving. And I think, again, just a single female is probably not producing a hell of a lot of milk to feed one single baby. Whereas the 3, well, they're all big fatties, all of them, got plenty of food, absolutely no problem. But we saw a deterioration in Lois's condition following that litter, which made us now have to think, well, how are we going to manage that? We don't want them to have back-to-back litters. So we did initially. Obviously, Bob wasn't in when she had the babies, and we didn't put her back in with Bob. We put her separate. But you could see how she, in her mental state, was suffering. She was frantic almost all the time at the bars, staring out, shaking the bars. She wasn't really putting on any weight quick enough that I would. I mean, these guys got very, very fast metabolism. You'd expect weight to be gained fairly quickly when the babies are no longer feeding, but she didn't. So when they were free, well, when she was free roaming, Bob was in the cage, or vice versa, they would just spend the entire time up at the bars of each other, staring, purring, singing. It almost felt like not putting them back together was cruel, more so than that risk of them having another litter straight away afterwards. So we let her back in with them, and after a week, she's like a transformed rat again. Just to give you some examples, I mean, she's no longer pacing up and down the bars, and that's horror. Any animal pacing is a bad sign. If an animal paces, it's a sign of stress, and she was doing that. No more pacing. Bob's no longer on edge. They sleep the right amount of time. They're eating. She's already got her condition almost back to where it was, I would say. Her eyes look brighter. She's just much happier in herself, and this kind of follows in the research we've done in the wild. They have some really interesting practices in the wild, what they do when they breed. And this kind of tallies with that. I mean, we can't take it as gospel, but from what we've observed, from what's been researched, I would say this is probably the case. So, observations in the wild include that they are potentially, or they will form a potential monogamous relationship with their male and female. And this can either come in 2 flavours. So they've seen them in the wild as a purely monogamous, a male and female bond for life, and they are the only mating pair. Or serial monogamy, which is where 2 wild animals will come together and mate for one single breeding season, stay together, and then separate. Now, this was observed in more cases than it was not in the wild, which is really interesting. The males were observed providing paternal care not just to the babies, but to the pregnant doe before, during, and after pregnancy, which is something you don't see with many animals. Now that tallies with the stress we've seen. If Bob and Lois have formed a monogamous bond as a mating pair, it almost kind of becomes more cruel to not allow them to stay together. So we're really in an odd predicament. Now, something else interesting that makes me a bit happier. They observed the females come into quite a regular heat cycle. Once every 3 to 5 days, it was observed that the males showed more interest in the females than they had previously. But the females were still kicking the males off. And we've seen this. So I think this was 2 days ago. Bob was very interested in Lois, harassing her to the point that I took him out for a couple of hours to give her a break. And I didn't want them mating. And he went off and slept and sulked, as he does, and she went off and slept on her own. It seems that the females can control ovulation, or at least to a degree that ovulation will only occur when intercourse has taken place. And if the female doesn't allow intercourse to take place, then it's her way of saying, yeah, I'm able to, but I don't want babies. And it was really interesting seeing Lois do that, kick him off and say, no, I'm not in the condition that I want to be. I really hope, I mean, we're going to carry on observing this behaviour. If this is the case, it would be great to see them control their breeding. Really interesting. Some of the observations about litter numbers in the wild was that they have between 3 and 6 litters during the summer period, and very, very few, if any, during the colder, wet season. Now, this would tally. You see this in fancy rats, where in the wild they have a lot less litters because of food restraints, because of predators, potentially having to move nests regularly. Compare that to when they're kept as pets and they will just breed all year round. They're like, whoa, there's plenty of food, I've got everything I want, there's no birds trying to eat me, I can just have lots of babies. I imagine that if you take that 3 to 5 litters that a pouch rat could have in the wild, and then dial that up, you're saying they potentially could have a litter back to back all year, and that is a worry for us. Not only because we don't want to be trying to find homes for that many, I don't think we could find good enough homes for that many, but I still don't think it would be good for the animal. So at the moment, for us, finding the best way of controlling that is kind of paramount. It's going to be a real tricky thing. We've ruled out things like the implant, we've ruled out giving them Gallostop or anything to stop the pregnancies because they have other side effects. In an ideal circumstance, I would like no more than 3 litters a year from any one single female. With the fancies, it's easy because you've got the choice. You go, yep, do you know what? We've got some names down. We're ready to go. So with these guys, it's going to be different. We're going to have to play it by ear. I don't want to be having more litters than we can home, nor more than is fair on the animal. We'll take this as it comes. We'll see. This is going to be a tricky one. I've got one other thing I'll go for. I'm realising I'm running over time. Wow, that's quite amazing. Normally we're finishing dead on past, but let's get this last bit in because this is another really interesting thing. As many of you know, we took on 2 rescues as well, called Gus and V. They were both very, very nervous. Very, very nervous. I don't think I personally had any dealings with any that were as nervous as them two. Now, my previous experience with some other species is that sometimes if you get a pair that are nervous, it can be where 2 are one of them is more nervous and allowing the other one to be nervous. They're picking up on each other's behaviours. So I noticed out of the 2, Gus was very, very nervous. V was somewhat not as nervous. So we decided that they weren't bonded, they were close. And they weren't, for example, a mated pair. So we separated them out and put them with a new partner, and observed to see whether there was any issues with them pining or missing each other, and there wasn't. They straight away bonded to the other partners. Now Gus is now living with Alice, and the transformation in him is amazing. It couldn't be more black and white. From a rat that previously would just sit in his bed all day, and I mean all day. He would only come out for food in the middle of the night when no one was up. We never saw him unless we got him out. Who now comes to the front. Hello, I'm Gus, I'm coming out. It's like a different animal, and I think that the part of that was V was kind of enabling. I could see it where he was scared. He would run and hide underneath V. Really, really unusual behaviour. So for him, separating him has made a big difference. At the moment, there's no sign really that Alice and Gus are bonding into that way. But if they stay as a non-breeding pair, that's also fine. As long as he's happy, as long as she's happy, that's we know we've made a bit of a difference there. Just means another cage. The other side of the coin is V. Now, I've really taken to V. She's this really dainty female. She's really pretty. She's got a lovely face, but she's still very nervous. And she still just sits in her bed all day, doesn't come out. We're making her come out when she's now living with Arthur, because obviously Alice was with Arthur. Alice has now gone to live with Gus, and V has gone to live with Arthur. And Arthur's very, very accepting of any rat. He's unless it's a male, he'll live with anyone. And he's been really, really patient with her. You could see how they were sleeping in separate beds for a couple of days, and she came over. I think she was feeling a bit lonely, and she snuck in, and we woke up and they were together. And now they sleep together every night. So if he comes out, I'm making her come out with him. And we're slowly getting there with her. I think, if anything, she was enabling Gus to be that nervous. She is that way. She is as nervous as she was. So we'll take as it comes with that. It's been an odd one. I think we can turn Gus around a lot easier than V. And when we first got them, I would have said the complete opposite. I really didn't believe that it was possible for us to turn Gus around because of how nervous he was. I mean, he was. You would hold him and he would smell his cage and just jump. I mean, no malice whatsoever in him. He wouldn't try and bite. He wouldn't try and scratch. He just desperately wanted to get back to his bed and hide away. A complete fear response, and it was really horrible to see. But to see him happy now means that at least we've learned that can be one of the ways of solving it. And we've got other animals in the community that are suffering from that same nervousness. So potentially that's our way of dealing with it. Well, I can see a question on here. Let's look at that question. A bit random. Have you had an experience with pouches and other animals together? Do they get along with dogs and cats? I think I kind of answered that, but no. Annette Reynolds, who's got Floki, her cat does get on with Floki somewhat. Floki's fine with her. So it is possible. I guess you've got to play it by ear. My cat just runs a mile. So doesn't want to be anywhere near the pouchies, so that's just that. I'm running over time. I'll skip through. As anyone's probably seen, I'm being attacked by Sally at the moment. That definitely come out on camera. She's hit the 6 months mark and she's becoming a cow bag. Now this is pretty common that they hit the 6 months mark, and between 6 months and a year they're really difficult. And she's at the point now where she'll sit there and lick me all over, lick my hand, lick my face, and then bite me. And there's no reason for it. It's not aggression. It's kind of an odd dominance thing, I guess. I got a fairly nasty bite this morning just for picking her up because she was going through the bin. So that's something awkward. And it's a shame because she was great at meeting people. If we had people round, I had no doubts I could just chuck her at anyone and trust her. And now I can't. So it's a shame, but I think give it 6 months, maybe we'll be back to where we were with her. I will finish up. I'm off for the rest of this week, and I'm going to try and get 2 videos done. I've started writing down some stuff for them. The first video I want to do is I want to do a video about the rules of keeping pouch rats in the US. Now, for anyone who's curious, there is I did 2 articles, did a lot of research on these articles. They're on Pouchipedia on our website. That talk about the laws per state and the laws as a country as a whole, because they differ per state and they differ as a country. They have a different law. I'm going to put that into a video because I think that'll make it more accessible to people. So that's one thing I'm going to try and plan to do. And the other one is these excellent questions have been asked. I would really like to be able to put these into a video because I think that they're excellent questions, and every new owner should. I'm going to add a few more to them as well, but should be aware of them because they're really, really important. I think that's it. I think that's us unpouched for today. I've gone 8 minutes over, so yammering on to myself, and I haven't even run the intro today. So maybe I will play us out in the intro. Maybe it'd be an outro, and I hope you've all enjoyed watching this week. And I will see everyone in a fortnight's time. Bye for now, everyone.